Hey, well, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Collision Live. Daniel here, your host, as always, and joined at the desk, as I always am, by the Humpty Dumpty to my great fall, Mr. Samuel David Camp. What is up?
It's not too much. It's good to be with you for another live stream. Probably, maybe the last for like a couple of weeks. Going to take a few.
For
weeks.
you, at least.
For me, yeah. So I'll be taking a little break once we have the arrival of our second child.
A distance makes the heart grow fonder. Well, we got to get Sam back. I'm excited to debut the first public debut of my new and improved nose. If I sound like my nose is plugged and ramble incoherently, it's because, as I mentioned last week, I had surgery a couple of days ago on my nose. Thought it was time to be able to breathe out of both nostrils. Surgery went well, is what I'm told, but I don't know. What else are they going to say? Sorry, it went awful. So
maybe next time.
So if I sound weird, that's why it is. But I thought I'd power through. I knew we'd be losing Sam for a couple episodes. So I thought we'd get another episode in.
We can.
Yeah, stuffy nose and all that stuff and all. But instead, a lot of stuff going on this week. A couple interesting topics that I think we could kind of dig into. Again, as we always say, that we encourage you, if you guys are watching live, or even if you're watching not live, if you're watching like a playback later, when you have time, go ahead and share your thoughts in the comment section. We'd love to dialogue with you, even as we dialogue with each other, and just try and kind of wrestle through some interesting topics and questions that we have as Christians as we try to kind of navigate culture and what our response should be and how we could contribute to it. But before we get into our main topics, we start off our show as we always do with pop culture news. So a couple of things that stood out to me this week. One, the Eternals, kind of one of the more recent MCU movies, made its debut on Disney Plus. It's now available on streaming, which meant that I was finally able to check this movie out. I missed it in theaters for a variety of reasons. Hey, if you missed it, if you have kids, you're just busy. Now is your chance to catch up on the story. Another thing that's been kind of trending, starting kind of yesterday, and I saw still today. Speaking of MCU and related characters and directors, Joss Whedon, also known as kind of the showrunner for Buffy and a bunch of sort of kind of pop culture, sci-fi, cult classic stuff. He's been on a downward spiral for a while now. A lot of stuff coming out that, hey, he's just not a nice person. He's kind of trying to make his comeback, his redemption tour. He had a article, I think it was on Vulture, where he kind of was interviewed and shared his side of the story to try and, I guess, build his character back up. The article is worth the read. Definitely doesn't accomplish what he hopes it does. It turns out he is a jerk, and we'll be jumping off that in our first topic, actually. But I know that's been a trending article. Book of Boba Fett, not necessarily a pop culture news, but I thought we'd just leave it up there in our stories, because we don't do reviews for these. But the third episode happened. The next one's happens tomorrow, and we can maybe get into it with Sam after, but. So far, the show is just kind of meh. Third episode, probably the weakest. Definitely not hitting the heights that The Mandalorian was. Another one that is sort of an eerie thing, but maybe not necessarily a sad thing. But Betty White, again, she passed away not this week. She passed away 2 weeks ago. But yesterday would have been her 100th birthday. And there was, a lot of planning and stuff going on for the celebration. And sort of in an eerie way, like the Picture People magazine, a lot of kind of pre-made, prepared like publications that are all celebrating her birthday as though she's alive, and articles and stuff. Which is, I don't know, it hit me weird. It's sort of this, hey, mortality, even those that we kind of expect to live forever, don't. And these kind of these magazines and stuff kind of reveal that to us. Something that just dropped this morning, Daniel Radcliffe, Mr. Harry Potter himself, was just announced that he will play Weird Al in a biopic, which just seems strange, but hey, Weird Al is a strange person, so maybe it'll be interesting. And the last kind of pop culture news story for us today, kind of bookend it with some Marvel news. Moon Knight, starring Mr. Oscar Isaac of Dune and Star Wars fame. They just released the first trailer for this, and again, I'm not a huge... I watch all the comic book movies. I don't read the comic books. I don't know all the lore. So I have no idea who this character is, but it looks like he's some kind of like vampire hunter, kind of crazy guy, kind of vigilante. I don't know. It looks kind of cool. This is a show, I believe, on Disney Plus. I'm not sure when this drops. I think in a month or 2 months. This will be sort of, following Loki and all the other MCU shows going on. So what do you think, Sam? All these kind of a more newsy week than we had last week. Any of these things stand out to you as interesting?
Yeah. I think, with the Eternals, because I watched that last night on Disney Plus because I don't really go to the movies anymore. It's just sort of a meh, like it's not much to talk about, and we were kind of saying before we went live that like a lot of these is just sort of like, are these just these placeholder movies to like set up some bigger like narrative, and I don't know. It just kind of gets old.
Yeah,
I think. And it's I don't know.
Kind of the sad part is that this is from the trailers. I've kind of been a little burnt out with like the MCU stuff. There's just so much of it, and it just seems very few of them are really standouts. Most of them are good. They're just we just have so much.
Yeah.
But the Eternals, the trailers and stuff was one of the few that actually intrigued me. Like, hey, this looks really different. It's an interesting concept and kind of expanding a large period of time, and so much kind of interesting stuff they could do with it. But like I watched it for the first time yesterday, and it was just let down by it. It's sort of a meh movie, not necessarily a terrible movie, but it definitely is sort of forgettable, just very long and ponderous, and there's not a whole lot happening. So definitely not. It's definitely kind of a lower tier Marvel movie.
And I think Daniel Radcliffe playing Weird Al is like the coolest thing, like, and the most random.
And that's sort of been his, like, since Potter is sort of his thing. He just plays weird. Like, I know he's been in a bunch of weird, like, indie movies and stuff. And
yeah,
I guess
so I think that's great.
He's got his Potter money. He can just sort of do whatever he wants to do.
Yeah.
And then, Moon Knight. I haven't kept up with
the
MCU
I
movies.
have no idea what Moon Knight is, but
yeah.
I'm a big fan of Oscar Isaac. I think he's kind of been crushing it lately in a lot of his roles, so.
Yeah, sadly, he is, I believe, sans the beard, his Dune beard that was so glorious.
Yeah, well, that'll take some off of his performance.
Yes,
sure.
But hey, maybe season 2. But like we said, every week here at the Killers and Live, we sort of just kind of pick a couple main topics, either just general stuff as we're sort of looking at scripture and looking at kind of cultural engagement as Christians, or else sort of more topical stuff of things that are going on. And this is sort of an interesting topic for our first one that had started as sort of like a general thing, that is a topic that I'd kind of wanted to talk about for a while. And then sort of all this Josh Whedon news that dropped, or not news, but kind of more developments that came out, have just sort of brought the conversation back to kind of being more timely of sort of what do you do with like art, or not just like high art, but like movies and books and music and stuff. Like, what do you do with that when it's made by people that turn out to be kind of despicable, jerky, like abusive? Like, can you separate like the art and the artist? And this is I guess like Josh Whedon, sort of the most recent ones, but you've seen this we've seen this with like J.K. Rowling, like sort of what are people, like I know like there's an official like Quidditch like league where they all play, and like now they're trying to distance themselves from J.K. Rowling because they don't believe her transgender views. And like Chris Pratt, when he kind of came out as he's a Christian or conservative, then you have people like, can we still enjoy his movies? Like, so you get it on both sides of the political
Guardians
fence,
of the Galaxy less funny now.
Yeah, I know. I don't want to watch those. But sort of this idea: can you still enjoy stuff that these people make, even if you completely disagree with their worldview and their. And there's an interesting quote and we'll kind of jump into this conversation as far as what do we do as Christians, because I think it is a relevant one that we need to wrestle with. There's an interesting kind of quote that touches on this. Thomas Griffiths Wainwright, kind of unknown today, kind of in the early 1800s. This was a writer, a classic kind of contemporary guy that was kind of this dandy that was out there, kind of getting popular, and in his time was kind of a big deal. Turns out that he was busy with some other things too, and a little side hustle where he was a serial killer. He was poisoning people, kind of according to legend, when they finally got busted for some other crime, but he ended up kind of in jail, and one of the inmates asked him like if he had killed his sister-in-law or mother-in-law, and his response was like, well, like I did, it was terrible, but she had just such terrible ankles. Like, he's just some lunatic guy that was just going around poisoning people in his spare time when he wasn't writing. But Oscar Wilde, another kind of flamboyant famous writer, ended up writing kind of like a autobiography or a biography on him, kind of celebrating his work. He's a big inspiration for Oscar Wilde, and he made this quote on the intro of that work, where he says, "The fact of a man being a poisoner is nothing against his prose. The domestic virtues are not the true basis for art." And basically, what he's saying is, hey, this guy might be a serial killer, but like that means nothing to the fact when you read his work. Like, his work is excellent, and I can still be inspired by it, regardless of how horrible of a person he was. He
Yeah.
wasn't endorsing the fact that he was killing people. And it's just sort of this, I don't know, for me, that quote kind of summarizes this sort of that debate of like, do we, you know, there's a lot that as Christians we don't agree with Oscar Wilde for, but like, is that an acceptable approach? Like as Christians, do we need to be more discerning that like, you know, hey, this movie might be good, but like, you know, the director has been outspoken, mocking the faith, or like, what do we do with that? Where do you kind of land on some of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's maybe a little bit complicated, but I think in large part, I think we can separate the art from the artist in many cases, and I think we just do that. Like, I don't think we're Googling every author that we're reading, every TV show that we watch, every movie that we watch. We don't know the private lives of everyone involved. So I think if you're gonna try and hold the standard of like, well, if you can't agree with the artist, then you shouldn't enjoy their art. I don't think that is even possible, probably. And I think there's also degrees of this, right? And so I think that maybe the most relevant example is with Bill Cosby. Fantastic run on the Cosby Show. Those are great, but I doubt that anybody is watching those in the same way now, knowing what we know now about Cosby. And so I think for actors and that sort of thing, it's probably going to hit a little bit different than, say, your favorite author who is not in their work, or, you know, a composer or, you know, some sort of music person. I think it kind of varies, I think, depending on the art medium.
Yeah, like you're saying, on the Cosby Show, you're definitely not watching. You know, the jokes haven't changed.
Yeah.
But there's something icky about it. You know, this kind of family man, this dad, and like.
Right.
So I think that, like you were saying, there is a sense that like it's not nothing. Like the fact of who the artist is, and a lot of times, who they are. Kind of manifests itself in the work. Not always. I think sometimes we overblow the fact that like anything that is made in art is just like a one-to-one copy of the artist's worldview,
right?
Which is usually people that don't create art, that don't really understand the process as much. That it's not always that simple. That it's just sort of pushing your own worldview all the time. But I do think you can separate. So it isn't nothing. But I think as Christians, the fact that you can affirm, hey, this is a great song, doesn't necessarily mean that you're endorsing everything that singer stands for.
Yeah.
And I think Scripture, there's like a lot of stuff with like cultural engagement or the arts. You don't always get is a lot of thou shall and then give you an easy answer. But a couple things that stood out to me, sort of relevant to this conversation. One is Philippians 4:8. Obviously, one of the most famous and kind of beloved verses in all of Scripture, where it says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And that's Paul kind of trying to set sort of the posture for Christians, that like, what should we focus our attention on? And again, he's not necessarily talking just about like art. He's talking about character and a lot of other things. But it's saying it's if there's something that is excellent or like that is praiseworthy or good, as Christians, like don't be hesitant to affirm that it's, hey, that's beautiful, that's good, that's awesome.
Yeah.
In the same token, if there's like the character of the artist, if that isn't any of those things, then we need to not endorse that. And kind of another one that stood out as far as like the Bible is if you read through both the kind of the narratives that explain like the construction of the tabernacle and the temple, like just count how many times that the biblical author uses the phrase like skillfully done or like by skillful workers. Like it's never just by like the builders, it's always skillfully done or excellently done. And it's just sort of to me as I read that, like the kind of the Bible affirming the value and the importance. Again, all these builders aren't. A lot of them have been shipped in from like Tyre and a different, not all this Israelites. And so these aren't all necessarily just faithful, God's chosen people, but it's still just affirming that their work was good and it could be affirmed on that grounds. I don't know. I think there's relevance crossover to me.
No, I think so for sure, because I think we can see like the good and the noble and the right, and the lovely and the pure in art, itself, and it doesn't have to necessarily be tainted by the individual who created it if that person ends up being some lunatic or whatever. So I think there is a degree of separation. And again, I think depending on the art form, it's easier to separate the artist from the art. I think some art forms it's more difficult to do that. Others it's easier. And so I think, and I think that's what, a lot of people maybe get hung up on as well, is just, it's hard to, some mediums, I think it's just harder to separate the artist from the art. And for those, it's, maybe it's a bit trickier and harder to affirm, the good thing that they created while not affirming, the artists themselves. But I think whenever you can do that, I think it behooves us to.
Yeah, I think I don't think there's like a Christian obligation to, and I understand people that just, they just don't want to like financially give support to a certain person just for who they are, what they stand for. I don't think Christians are obligated to support every artist and everything, but it's just sort of going both ways. That if something is good, if it's well done art, I don't think it's like a Christian compromise to just acknowledge, hey, this is an excellent movie. That I disagree with a lot of the worldview stuff. I definitely disagree with the lifestyle of the lead actor, and the director is just a big power hungry, terrible guy. But the story itself edifies me, and it's good and it's well done. Like, I think sort of a nuanced evaluation of like a film or something is consistent with what we would see in like scripture for how to navigate culture. But let us know what you guys think. Do you guys struggle with that? Are there particular like songs or artists or people that maybe you enjoyed at some point and then they had a change of heart? I know some of this becomes relevant with like artists that are kind of identify as like Christian artists or like musicians, and then they like abandon or walk away from the faith. It's like, well, what do you do with that now? Like, what do you, do you still enjoy their old stuff? Do you just draw a line and now their new stuff is terrible, but what they had before they made that kind of deconversion or whatever? It's tricky, but I think as Christians we should kind of navigate that and walk through it in a more thoughtful way than just sort of a reactionary. Oh, he's a bad person. Not gonna watch that movie anymore.
And speaking of thoughtfulness.
And speaking of thoughtfulness and nuance and depth, the next segment of our show, we have Host Corner. So Sam went last week. I'm trying to remember what you rambled on about.
My sweet new telescope that I used to watch the moon with.
Watching the moon. The real moon night.
Yes.
So this is my chance to share from the depths of my heart.
I can't wait to see what metal band or genre of metal you're going to talk about.
Metal or Lord of the Rings. It's an alternate between those. As I've shared before, I start every year by rereading the Lord of the Rings, as all Christians and just noble people should do. That. So I started by reading the Lord of the Rings this year, and there's something that stands out to me every time that I read these books, and that's just the character of Gollum. Sometimes the Lord of the Rings gets kind of criticized for being very simplistic and black or white. The evil is all ugly, and the good's all noble and handsome and fair, and just sort of this, that there's no nuance. And I think that kind of misses the point of what Tolkien was doing with the character of Gollum in the story. And which is kind of we're used to it now, but like shocking at the time, is that like Frodo, like the hero for all of the story, like, spoiler alert for an old book, he fails at the end. He is overcome by the power of the ring, by the power of evil. Even though he withstood for so long that he wasn't able to stand against the ring, he's undone. And ultimately, it's Gollum that kind of attacks and takes the ring, trips, and falls into the lava. And kind of what I think Tolkien was doing with that is that it's still a victory for Frodo, and going back even to Bilbo, but it was like the mercy, the pity to not kill this creature, this lowly creature when they had the chance, sort of by showing kind of living this sort of Christian grace to this creature, that ultimately that and kind of divine sovereignty or whatever is what won the day, that it wasn't just strength of arms and the noble heroes. That I don't know. I know I'm out of time, but I think there's so much nuance to that as far as this, like, there is good, there is evil, and Christians and kind of noble people should fight heroically against evil, but it's not really just for force. Like, it's through mercy and living kind of the Christian life that ultimately that and kind of the power of the divine is what will save the day. So Gollum is kind of the hero of the story in some ways.
Yeah, well, I'll have to start measuring your host corners now with the cycles of the moon. So I'm glad you were able to get that off your chest, Daniel. It's,
Yeah, well,
I think the minute passed, hours ago, but here you are, still rambling on. No, I agree. I think Gollum is the overlooked and the more nuanced character of Lord of the Rings for sure. So.
Yeah, and there's a lot to it. So any of this sort of like post Game of Thrones world where it's like it's so simplistic. They're not all anti-heroes and angsty. Like,
yeah,
if you actually read
Frodo's pretty
read the Lord of the
angsty,
Rings, there's a lot of nuance to that story that
and I think
very
that's
much
why
align.
I think that's why it remains one of the greatest books ever written. So.
And by one of, he means the greatest.
Yeah.
But speaking of books, that is a segue into our next topic.
Oh, so unintentional too, but you're welcome.
Thank you. I didn't have one ready, so Sam set me up for the alley-oop for that one. Is this classic literature? As you guys know, I'm a classic literature nerd. I know you read classic literature.
I do on occasion. Yeah,
maybe not quite as obsessive as I am with classic literature. And we've talked about before on the Listen Live is that Christians should read more fiction, and that there's just a lot of value in that. But I thought kind of specifically just sort of these classic kind of older books. I know last year I keep a record every year of like how many books I read. The goal is always like 54 to read a book a week. And audio books do count. And I way overshot that last year. I read a lot of books, and as I was looking back over that, I just had a lot of classic literature last year, probably more than I ever have since I was maybe in college. And just sort of the value that I got.
You were like burning through a bunch of Dickens last year, weren't you?
Yeah, I finished off Dickens last year. Read all through the Jane Austen books. A lot of filling in those holes. Keep my English college degree cred, reading through some of that, and just kind of thinking there's just so much value in these classic books that we don't, if Christians do read, books or novels today, it's usually kind of more modern stuff. And so I actually wrote a hint for what I'll share in the next segment, an article we just published sort of on classic literature and 5 books that I think Christians should read, 5 classic novels. We thought we kind of talk about that. Like why, what is the value in classic literature? Like, is it all just sort of outdated? Like, is there any value? Should Christian just read kind of, contemporary, published last month theology, political, social, or is there value in like reading, Dickens like a couple hundred years ago talking about English?
Yeah,
stuff?
well, and I think we talked about this at one point last year. I forget which episode, but which live stream. But Karen Swallow Pryor wrote a great book on reading well, and in it she talks about just the power of great literature that forms us and not just informs us. And I love that line that she uses, that we can be formed by great stories and great literature. And I think that's still true today, because I think the benefit of like classic literature specifically is a lot of it are taken from Christian values, and so there's a lot of Christian virtue displayed and celebrated in a lot of the classic literature. So maybe that's a more approachable starting place for Christians today who maybe don't read much at all, and if they do, it's some contemporary, political book or sociology book or whatever, and not necessarily going to be fiction. And so I think classic literature is way more approachable in that regard.
Yeah, and I think there's some, is all classic literature necessarily better than non-classic literature? Like, no, like there's, there's a lot of good, contemporary literature as well. But like one of the advantages that classic literature has several advantages, but one, I think it's been kind of weeded through just by it was harder to publish back in the day.
Yeah.
There's you can't just publish on Amazon. You can't. There's less publishers. There's less ability to do it. That in some ways and obviously I think we lost a lot of really great classic books because of that. Especially if a lot of female writers or people of color, other different things that just didn't kind of make the cut because of the cultural stuff. But it did also weed through just, they're not as publishing anyone with a book idea.
Yeah.
But also just time. I forget what, I couldn't find the quote. One of those guys said, the only true judge of a classic is time. And one of the advantages I think that like a classic literature has over modern literature is that time has kind of revealed that what was wasn't that great, or it's revealed, or it's brought the stuff that that was really good. Like, we might, there's classics being written today. We won't really know what they are, what stood the test of time until probably way after our own lifetime. Because we just don't know. Like, a lot of it's reactionary, and it's very just sort of, this happened, a couple months ago, and now here's sort of a book that's dealing with that, and we haven't really processed it. And what classic literature ends up doing, to me, is this way more universal. Like, these are sort of themes that have stood the test of time, that kind of transcend their own kind of cultural context.
And I think that's what makes them so powerful too. And I think, the test of time is, I think, what makes a classic, because it has relevancy, all these years later. And, even, going way back, I think like Pilgrim's Progress was written in the 1600s, 1700s. And it's still, it may be a bit outdated, but even, looking at, Shakespeare, like, you can still get a degree in like Shakespearean literature or poetry, because all these years later, like, the themes that he was dealing with are still very relevant today. And so I think that's what, it's that time that has elapsed since it was written that makes it such a great and compelling work. Even today, like, you might think that it's like, what would somebody from way back then have to say? But people way back then also thought a lot more, I think, than people do today. They have way less distractions. And so oftentimes some of the greatest thinking was done, centuries ago.
And this is a lot of, like, times have changed, but I think like human nature hasn't changed. And like, like, we're called to live in today and the now. And, if you're here in America, then you're, called to live in American society. And, we weren't sent to Earth to live in like Victorian England or something like with the Dickens. But one of the things that, as I was sort of reading through a lot of these sort of old and a ton of sort of that Victorian era kind of English literature, is just that, like, just how almost shockingly relevant and like timely and like topical a lot of this stuff was about, like, the power of the press, and like, can you trust these, how it manipulates culture, and like just human nature and politics, and just sort of social relations, and like social justice, and like all the stuff that like someone like Dickens was writing about in England like 200 years ago. Well, and we're still dealing with that today, just the different kind of societies. But
well, I think for Dickens especially, because that was right around like the Industrial Revolution, and so like I think we're still sort of like figuring out humanity post-Industrial Revolution. Like, there's so many things that changed about just how people live in a sort of a modern society that I think we're still going to be trying to figure that out, I think, even centuries from now.
Yeah, and I think social media is kind of, for many reasons, has kind of messed with our brains as a society, as a people, and the way we process things. But I think it's kind of it's pushed sort of the mindset of like kind of this reactionary, like, something happened 5 minutes ago, like, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah.
How do we process it? What's the answer? Very kind of, and I think sometimes even like a lot of books and things that are coming out, like, it's so like in the moment that it's like sometimes I'll see like books on like the bestseller shelves and be like, this book is going to be like outdated in like a week. Like, I can't imagine investing so much time on something that is so not understood. I think even as like all like the COVID stuff is one of the things that that it's sort of revealed is just how quickly things change, and trying to keep up with what the answers are, and like this things are changing, and like, so I think there is. I think as Christians we should be educated on what's happening now in society, and I think articles and stuff are good for that. There are books that I think really do speak to the time that we're in that are worth reading. But I think so I'm not saying don't read modern stuff. If it was published after the 1800s, then just ignore that garbage and get back to the good stuff. Like, it's just that there's also a lot of kind of these more universal themes and books and stuff that I think kind of transcend just sort of the now and our own like current biases or worldviews that I think kind of get us outside of that and allow us to maybe process it differently than we would if it's like we know someone's writing this in a very specific context of our own like political situation.
No, I think there is a certain transcendence that comes from a lot of the classic literature that kind of just allows you to drop into a particular world and sort of just enjoy that journey. And I think just sort of in defense of reading fiction in general, I think the other great thing about it is I think it's still probably the most immersive form of entertainment because while reading, you have an imagination. And so I think it can just be so much more of a immersive experience for the reader reading fiction than even watching a movie or TV show or whatever. So I think I'm still a very big fan of reading as a form of entertainment, as well as being formed by it and so forth.
Yeah, and even just sort of like going beyond, like I don't even really think of reading as entertainment. I know it is; it's very entertaining, but kind of not in the same way as like like a TV show or something.
Yeah.
But let us know what you guys think. What are maybe some of your favorite classics? Like I said, starting in a second, we have an article that came out where I kind of list some of mine, and far from an exhaustive list. But are there some classics that you guys enjoy reading that you've kind of got enrichment from? Maybe some classics that you've always wanted to read, or just looking for some recommendations. I've read a lot of them. I have a lot of books that I would be happy to share with you, or recommend, not share my prized hardback copies, but just share the love of reading. So much wisdom in there that I think Christians can learn about human nature. It's just sort of taking that extra effort to read a book instead of just sort of plopping down and turning on Disney Plus or whatnot. We do have a follow around before we end off our show. Monty commented that Boba Fett is meh. All the Marvel shows this past year have been a mixed bag. Moonlight looks cool and dark. Hopefully it and Kenobi bring some seriousness to the Disney Plus shows. Yeah, Kenobi's another Star Wars, the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. I'm hoping is good. I'm just sort of sick of like Tatooine desert planets. That's where Boba Fett's being. That's where the Mandalorian was. That's where Kenobi will probably be. I'm hoping they do kind of more stuff than we've got. And again, I haven't followed. Have you watched any of the Marvel shows? You watched some of them, I think. You watched the one we never get right, the Winter Soldier.
Yeah, I don't think I finished that one. I think I did finish the... Oh, what was it? I forget what it's called now. The one with the guy with the thing in his forehead. What is that?
Oh, the WandaVision?
WandaVision.
Yeah.
That's it.
I watched the first couple of that, liked it, and then sort of forgot about it.
As you can tell, it left an impression.
And I will admit, like, I don't mean to like disparage on it though, because like as soon as they start like this new Lord of the Rings show, or if they start making like, I will totally be the guy that's like, anything related to it I'm watching, and I'd be like, with my wife, like, hey, that's Suri in the shipwright, he's from the Grey Havens, and he like all the connections, the Easter eggs. I'll be kind of doing what a lot of people that love the comic books will be doing. It's just, to me, it's just they're stretching the material very thin. Kind of, hey, here's sort of an idea we have. Let's make an 8-episode TV show about it. I just think you're sort of seeing that they're pushing that a little bit too far. But this week at the Collision, a couple of things to coming your way. One, we published a new article kind of related to the classic literature that we were just talking about. Just 5 great novels that I think Christians should read. I wanted to do a more clickbaity, that every Christian should read to keep their salvation or something. But these are just 5 books that I don't think...
That didn't work out for you?
Yeah, pushing it a little bit too far. But just 5 books that I think, not even necessarily the best books that a Christian could read, but just that I think Christians will or could read. They're not super daunting, not super long.
I read The Count of Monte Cristo last year, and that's an undertaking.
Yeah, that takes effort. These are ones they still take effort to read. They're not all short, but maybe more accessible to like a modern audience. And maybe when I'm scrambling for material for an article, it'll be 5 more books that Christians should read. We'll keep doing that. But I encourage you to check that out. I love talking about books. I love talking about books with other people that love books. So I'd love to hear your opinion on the 5 books that I chose. And maybe if you have any ideas for other books that you could add to the list. We do have, like we shared last week, there we go. Yeah. The Collision Volume 2, our new anthology is still, what is it? Still en route?
Yeah, it's en route. Yeah. I haven't received it yet, but...
So maybe by next week's live stream, I'll be able to announce that the book is finally for sale, released. Just an interesting kind of anthology, a bunch of different writers that have contributed to the Collision, talking about different issues in the church and culture and media and movies, and just a lot of interesting stuff. It's a fun book, sort of an overview of sort of what it looks like to collide with the world and cultural engagement. So stay tuned for that. That is coming soon. Any kind of final things we have going on here?
I think that's it.
So Sam, wish Sam luck. Next time you see him, he might be the father of 2 instead of the father of 1.
Yep.
Hopefully next
We'll
time
see.
you see me, I will be able to speak clearly through my nose and breathe
at
once
last.
again, or maybe for the first time, the new and improved Daniel. But I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch, join us live, or watch us on the playback. A lot of stuff coming up here at the Collision, so I encourage you guys subscribe to the channel, like the page, wherever you're watching us from. Just sort of join the Collision, contribute, comment, as we sort of continue kind of together to navigate and just contribute and collide with the culture that God has placed us in. But most of all, guys, stay safe and continue to collide with the world for Christ.